Hi, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of Malice in the Mitten. I'm your host, Tracy Preston, along with my bestie, Christine Mulligan. Hey, Christine.
Hey, Trace. How's it going? What are we getting into today?
Well, after last week's show, I got to thinking about the names of the murderers that touched Michigan from the John List show that we just did. So I decided we're going to do the next few shows on some of those people. So, Christine, have you ever stayed somewhere that felt a little off?
You mean like everything looks normal, but something's just giving you the heebie-jeebies? Something's just not sitting right?
That's right. What if that feeling wasn't instinct, but by design? What if someone builds a place knowing exactly how to trap you inside it?
That wouldn't just be a place. That would be a trap and possibly a weapon.
That's right. And tonight, we step inside a building that wasn't meant to shelter people, but to control them. And the man behind it once walked through Michigan. So, let's get into it. This is Season 11, Episode 18, H.H. Holmes, the house that was built to kill, and the devil who touched Michigan.
Okay, before we get started, content warning. This episode contains discussions of murder, coercion, and psychological manipulation. Please take care while listening.
Now, we tell these stories with respect for victims, for families, and for truth. Before we go any further, I want you to picture something. You're traveling in 1893. A train ride was long, loud, exhausting. But when you step off, Chicago feels electric. Lights you've never seen before. Crowds from all over the world. Music, movement, possibility. You've never felt anything like it. And for the first time in your life, you feel like something could change. You find a place to stay. It's respectable, owned by a doctor. It's clean and affordable and safe. And that's where this story begins. Not in fear, not in suspicion, but in trust.
Yeah, and that's what makes stories like this a little hard to hear, because nothing about this moment feels dangerous so far. It feels hopeful, and that's probably why it worked.
That's right. Now, before the name H.H. Holmes became something people feared, there was a boy named Herman Webster Mudgett. He was born in 1861 in Gilmanton, New Hampshire, a small town that was quite religious and structured, a place where people knew each other and expectations were clear. His father was described as strict, at times harsh. His mother, deeply religious. The household itself, rigid. Order mattered. Discipline mattered. Appearance mattered.
All the makings. That kind of environment shapes a child in very specific ways. When everything is controlled, when emotion isn't always safe to express. Some kids learn to comply. Others, most of them, learn to disconnect.
And Herman appeared to be the kind of child who watched more than he spoke. He was intelligent, quiet, often described as withdrawn. There are stories passed down over time that attempt to explain what came next. One of the most repeated is that as a child, Herman was forced by other boys to confront a human skeleton. That he was terrified at first, but then something changed. But here's the truth. We don't know how accurate that story is because much of what we know about Holmes came from Holmes himself.
Okay, so the story gets complicated because when someone becomes infamous and their story precedes them, their story gets rewritten like the telephone game, sometimes by others and sometimes by the person themselves. So instead of asking, did this one moment create him? We should be asking something completely different. We should be asking about the patterns. What patterns were there?
Now, even as a child, there are accounts more consistently reported of cruelty toward animals, a lack of emotional response, a curiosity about death, not fear, but curiosity.
All right, well, curiosity can go either way. That difference matters because fear is human. Curiosity about death, especially without empathy, that's something else.
And it doesn't mean someone is destined to become violent, but it does mean something is missing. Now, neighbors would later describe him as polite, well-mannered, even likable. And that's one of the most unsettling parts of this story, because there was no clear warning, no obvious break, no moment where everyone could say, something is wrong.
Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones no one is looking at.
That is right. Now, as Herman grew older, he didn't become isolated from society. He learned how to move within it. He excelled academically. He understood expectations. And more importantly, he learned how to meet them. But beneath that, something was forming. Not chaos, not rage, but control. And that need for control would follow him all the way to Michigan. In 1884, Herman Webster Mudgett arrived in Ann Arbor. He enrolled at the University of Michigan Medical School, one of the most respected medical programs in the country at that time. But he didn't stay long. Records indicate he attended for roughly a year, possibly just over. Long enough to learn, but not long enough to graduate. But for him, it became a place to learn something else entirely, like fraud, deception, and manipulation.
Well, that is interesting to me. He didn't need the degree. He wasn't going for the degree quite necessarily. He needed the knowledge. He got what he was looking for. He stayed there long enough just to get the knowledge he needed.
Exactly. Because what Herman found in Ann Arbor was access. Medical training in the 1880s was very different from today. Students weren't just reading textbooks. They were working directly with the human body. Cadavers were used regularly. Dissection was a core part of learning, and oversight was not what we would expect now. Bodies weren't always easy to come by, and that created a system. One where bodies were bought, sold, and sometimes taken.
Right away, he's in an environment where death is normalized. It's every day, where the human body becomes something to study. And if someone already has a detachment, the ability to detach from reality, that can only reinforce it.
Now, Herman didn't recoil from that environment. Rather, he adapted to it. quickly. Now, while in medical school, he began experimenting with something else: insurance fraud. He would acquire cadavers, alter them, and use them to stage accidents, then collect on insurance claims filed under false identities.
Oh my goodness, that took a left turn for me, actually. So none of this is impulsive. None of this just happened. This is all calculated. And he's not just learning anatomy and all that medical school have to offer. He's learning how to use it to cash in.
Yeah, I know you didn't. I didn't see that one coming either. Now, Michigan didn't create H.H. Holmes, but it gave Herman Mudgett something critical: proof. Proof that he could manipulate systems and get away with it. By most accounts, he blended in. He wasn't an outcast. He wasn't isolated. He was polite, well-spoken, and even charming.
I'm sure he was. All con men are charming. That's what people always seem to forget. And that's what also makes it dangerous, because there's no warning signs people can point to. No moment where someone says, stay away from him. You know, something to give you the woo-woo to cross the street when he's coming. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Now, if anything, he learned how to become more believable, more convincing, more trusted. And during this time, he was already married to Clara Lovering, a life running parallel to everything else. But before Chicago, before aliases, before the headlines, there was a woman named Clara Lovering. She married Herman Webster Mudgett in 1878. They were young, and at that point, he wasn't H.H. Holmes. He was just Herman.
There was a version of him that someone loved, that someone believed in enough to build a life with him. But then again, I feel like maybe I'm adding on our modern day perspective to something in 1870 something. They married for existence, but still, that woman felt close enough to him and knew a whole different side of him, obviously, to marry him.
Right. Now, Clara came from a respected family that was educated and stable. The kind of life that, from the outside, looked secure. And for a time, it was. And they had a son together, of which they've named Robert.
So now we're not just talking about a relationship, a marriage. We're talking about a family, a child growing up with no idea who his father would become.
That's right. But as Herman moved forward, Clara stayed behind. And when he left for medical school in Michigan, Clara didn't go with him. And this is where something important happens. He doesn't formally end the marriage. He doesn't divorce her. He simply moves on.
Well, that says a lot, because ending something requires accountability. Walking away just doesn't.
Right. Now, as the years went on, Clara remained in New Hampshire, raising their son, living a life that became increasingly separate from the man she married. Meanwhile, Herman, now becoming Holmes, began relationships with other women. Some he married, some he deceived, all while still legally tied to Clara.
That kind of deception, it's layered, because Clara didn't just lose a husband. She lost the truth of who he was.
And here's what makes Clara's story so striking. She was never part of the scandal, never drawn into the headlines, never publicly connected to the crimes as they unfolded. She lived outside of it,
Yeah, and he was doing it all as Holmes anyway. So how would she even know that it was him? In a way, she escaped something she didn't even know she needed to escape from. Bananas.
I know. Now, Clara and her son Robert would go on to live relatively quiet lives, far removed from the notoriety that would follow the name H.H. Holmes. And perhaps that distance is what saved them. Because long before the world knew what he was capable of, Clara had already been left behind. Now, Michigan wasn't where H.H. Holmes became infamous, but it may be where he realized he could become anything he wanted, and no one would stop him. Herman Mudgett disappears, and in place, H.H. Holmes emerges, confident, charming, convincing.
That level of reinvention, he wasn't hiding from anything. He was just trying to control the new narrative.
And he did. And by the time Holmes reached Chicago, his life wasn't just built on lies. It was built on parallel lives. He was still legally married to Clara, and yet he married again and again without divorcing any of them.
So he's not just deceiving strangers on the reg. He's maintaining entire relationships all at the same time.
Right. And Holmes would present himself as different men to different women. For one, a doctor, to another, a businessman, a partner. Each version tailored to what that person needed to believe.
Of course, as con men do, because that's not just lying, that's the identity construction. He becomes what someone is looking for. He becomes what they're going to be responsive to.
Now, one of the most notable marriages during this time was to Minnie Williams herself. A marriage built on deception, on control, on financial manipulation, and one that would end the same way many of his relationships did, in disappearance.
Yeah, he didn't just take lives, he erased them.
Now, by the time the world would come to know the name H.H. Holmes, the pattern was already set. Trust, control, disappearance, and a system that ensured no one would hear the difference. In 1893, Chicago becomes the center of the world, the host of the World's Columbian Exposition, a place of light, opportunity, hope, and for women, a chance at independence. The White City wasn't just an event, it was an experience. Massive white buildings lined with electric lights, something many people had never seen before. And at night, it glowed like something out of a dream. There were exhibits from across the world, new inventions, performances, food people had never tasted before. And at the center of it all, the very first Ferris wheel. People came by the millions. Families, travelers, young women, stepping out into the world on their own for the first time. They dressed carefully, carried letters of recommendation, hoped for work, and believed if they just found the right opportunity, their lives could change.
This is a critical moment. Women traveling alone, seeking work, trying to build new lives for themselves, and the world at large was just not ready to protect them yet.
Now, some answered ads placed by Holmes, a job, a room, a future. Julia Connor wasn't just passing through Chicago. She had a life. She worked in Holmes's building, and over time, she became part of his inner circle. She was described as kind, approachable, someone people trusted, and she was a mother. Her daughter Pearl was young, still dependent on her for everything. Now, at some point, Julia and Holmes became involved, and this is where things become complicated because we don't know the full nature of that relationship. Was it manipulation? Was it coercion? Was it promises made by someone who knew exactly how to gain her trust?
That one most likely. This is where it stops being distant. A mother and her child. Whatever choices Julia made, she made them with her child Pearl in mind.
This is where I slow down because we want answers. We want things to be clear, but real life isn't always like that. And when someone is skilled at manipulation, they don't just control situations. They control how someone feels, what they believe, what they hope for. And Julia, she was trying to build something for herself and for her daughter, Pearl. December of 1891 was the last time Julia and Pearl were seen. After that, they were gone. No goodbye, no explanation, just absence.
That absence, that silence, that's what stays with you. Because for families, that silence never ends. A child just gone like that, it's the silence. It's the unanswers.
Agreed. Now, by the time Minnie Williams enters this story, H.H. Holmes is no longer experimenting. He's refining. Now, Minnie Williams was not vulnerable in the way some of his earlier victims were. She was educated, independent, and capable. Originally from Mississippi. Now, Minnie had moved north looking for opportunity, like so many others drawn to Chicago during the World's Fair. But Minnie had something else, something Holmes recognized immediately. She had access to property and inheritance.
Yeah, so now the motivation shifts. It's not just about control anymore. It's more strategic. It's about finances.
That's right. And when Holmes introduced himself, he was charming, attentive, convincing, and Minnie trusted him. Over time, Holmes persuaded her to transfer ownership of her property into his control.
Not that I will ever understand that level of trust, but that level of trust, no matter what, doesn't happen overnight. That's built slowly and intentionally.
And once that transfer was complete, Minnie Williams disappeared. No confirmed sightings, no verified departure. Just gone.
That pattern, it repeats. And by this point, he knows exactly what he's doing.
He sure does. And not long after Minnie arrived in Chicago, her sister followed, Anna Williams. Now, Anna was not part of Holmes' world initially. She came looking for Minnie.
That's what changes everything for me, because Anna isn't chasing opportunity. She's chasing someone she loves.
Now, Anna expected to find her sister, to reconnect, to understand what Minnie had built. Instead, she stepped into a space Minnie had already entered. And like her sister, Anna Williams disappeared.
And that's a different kind of loss entirely. Because now it's not just one life interrupted. It's a family completely erased.
And by the time Minnie Williams disappears, H. Holmes has something he didn't have before: control over property, land, a physical space, something permanent. And that changes everything.
Yeah, because now it's not just about people anymore. It's about a place.
Now, Holmes had already proven he could manipulate individuals, convince them, control them, disappear them. But now he had the ability to build something that would do it for him. He began constructing a building on Chicago's South Side. At first, it appeared ordinary, a mixed-use structure, shops on the ground floor, rooms above. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming.
That means no one was questioning it.
Exactly, because from the outside, it made sense. But inside, Holmes was doing something very different. Workers were hired and fired frequently. No one stayed long enough to understand the full layout. No one saw the entire design.
Yeah, so no one could ever piece it together.
Bingo. Now, walls were built, then torn down, then rebuilt. Rooms were added, hallways shifted, doors placed where they didn't quite make sense, and no one, not a single worker, was ever given the full plan.
So the building itself is just a huge secret.
Exactly. This wasn't poor construction. It wasn't confusion. It was design. Because Holmes wasn't just building a hotel. He was building a system, a place where every room had a purpose. Every hallway led somewhere, or nowhere, on purpose. Every single detail was controlled.
Yeah, but he didn't just want a place to commit crimes. He wanted a place that made them.
That's right. Now, by the time the building was complete, it had a reputation. Not officially, not publicly, but quietly. People talked. Workers noticed things they couldn't explain. Guests described strange layouts, unusual experiences, and over time, that building would become known by another name: the Murder Castle. Now let's walk through the hotel, not as investigators, but as guests. You're handed a key. Holmes smiles. You trust him. So you step into the hallway, and at first, nothing feels wrong. But as you walk, it changes. The hallway turns sharply, then again and again. Doors line the walls. Some open, some don't. Some feel heavier than they should. You try one, but it's locked from the outside.
That realization that must happen when you realize you can't get out. That's pure panic.
Yeah, it's like you put them in a maze.
Yeah.
And they just keep getting lost, going deeper and deeper into this place. Now, some rooms have no windows, no airflow, just walls. And hidden within those walls are gas lines, controlled remotely. Now, Holmes didn't need to enter the room. He controlled everything from a distance. You don't stay in the room, you're moved by a chute. It's narrow, dark, sudden, and then the basement. The basement wasn't random. It was functional. There were tools, equipment, processes, everything designed to ensure nothing remained.
That level of intention is crazy. That's planning to the ninth degree. That's not someone reacting in the moment to anything. That's someone who thought this whole thing through, step by step. He didn't just use the building, he built it for this.
Women entered, trusting and hopeful, and then they vanished.
This wasn't really random, though. This was completely calculated. That's what makes it really unsettling. And even more so, if you were there back in this time, you would be one of those ticket holders, okay?
I can't disagree. Now, for years, H.H. Holmes controlled everything. The narrative, the people, the outcomes. He built systems designed to protect him, and they worked until they didn't. In 1894, Holmes entered into another scheme, another plan built on deception, this time with a man named Benjamin Pitezel.
And now this feels different again, because now he's not working alone.
No, the plan was simple. Pitezel would fake his death. Holmes would help stage it. They would collect the insurance money and split it. A scheme Holmes had experience with. A system he believed he understood. But this time, Holmes changed the rules. Instead of staging a death, he caused one. Benjamin Pitezel was found dead, and Holmes moved quickly. He collected the insurance payout, convinced Pitezel's wife everything was under control, and then he took custody of the children.
Now that moment right there, I don't really understand. That moment right there, that's where everything shifts.
Now, because Holmes had always relied on control, on managing people one at a time, but now there were too many moving pieces, too many lies, too many eyes. The insurance company began to question the claim. Something didn't add up, and the doubt became an investigation led by Frank Geyer.
And this is where Holmes loses something he's always had prior to this: control of the narrative.
Now, Geyer followed Holmes' trail across cities, across aliases, across lies. And what he uncovered wasn't just fraud. It was something much darker, because as investigators searched, they began to find the truth. Not the version Holmes told, but the reality. And piece by piece, the system he built began to collapse.
He didn't fall because someone caught him in the act. He fell because he believed he couldn't be caught at all.
Now, when Benjamin Pitezel died, the story should have ended there. A failed scheme, a life lost. But it didn't, because Holmes didn't walk away. He stepped further in. He turned his attention to the people left behind, and that was Pitezel's family, his wife and his children. Holmes convinced Pitezel's wife that everything was under control, that the plan had simply changed. He offered help, guidance, and reassurance, and in doing so, he gained access to the children, 3 of them in particular: Alice, Nellie, and Howard. Holmes began moving them from place to place, across cities, across state lines, always under a new name, a new story, a new explanation. Letters were sent to their mother, reassuring her, telling her that the children were safe. that everything was fine, but the truth was something else entirely. Now, at different points along that journey, the children disappeared. Not all at once, not in one place, but separately. For investigators, this became one of the most difficult parts of the case because they were not just following Holmes anymore, they were searching for children. Now, Detective Frank Geyer traveled across multiple states, following Holmes's path, piece by piece, location by location, trying to find answers, trying to find them. But what he uncovered was devastating, and it confirmed something investigators had begun to fear, that Holmes's deception had gone further than anyone had imagined. The search for Peitzel's children had become a turning point for investigators, for the public, and for the case against Holmes, because this couldn't be explained away, couldn't be manipulated. It couldn't be reframed. It was real. By the time investigators began closing in, Holmes was already on the move. Again, new cities, new names, new stories, because movement was part of his survival. But this time, something was different, because Holmes wasn't just being watched, he was being followed relentlessly. And Geyer didn't rely on luck, he followed the patterns, paper trails, rental records, witness statements, and most importantly, he followed inconsistencies, because Holmes could change his name, but he couldn't completely erase his behavior. Holmes's biggest mistake was believing he could manage everything: the insurance company, the family, the aliases, all at once. And in November of 1894, Holmes was finally arrested, but not for murder, for fraud.
Of course. That's what makes it interesting, right? They couldn't get him for what he actually did, but they could get him for what they could prove.
And the one thing it makes me think of is Al Capone.
Right.
Now, because at that moment, the full scope of his crimes wasn't yet known, but the arrest stopped him. It slowed the movement, the manipulation, the control. And once Holmes was in custody, investigators had something they hadn't before, and that was time. Time to dig, time to search, time to connect the pieces. And what they uncovered would transform the case from fraud to something far darker. By 1896, the story had reached its end, at least legally. H. Holmes was found guilty and sentenced to death. Now, Holmes confessed to 27 murders, but here's the truth. He lies frequently, convincingly. Some experts believe the number was lower. Others believed it may have been higher. But Holmes knew something important. If he controlled the story, he controlled how he would be remembered. Now, in the days leading up to his execution, Holmes remained what he had always been: calm, composed, controlled. He gave statements, offered version of events, adjusted details. Even at the end, he managed the narrative. And on May 7th, 1896, Holmes was led to the gallows. Witnesses described him as calm, unshaken. He stood and looked out and spoke, maintaining that he was not the man people believed him to be. Now, the execution was carried out by hanging, and in that moment, the man who built his life on deception lost control for the final time. Holmes had made one final request, that his body be buried in concrete deep enough that no one could disturb it.
Well, that tells you something right there. He was afraid somebody was going to harm his dead body like he did to all those others.
That's right. Perhaps it was fear, or perhaps it was the final attempt to control what happened to him after death. Because for a man who controlled everything in life, the only thing left was what remained.
They left his body out in a field somewhere.
Yeah, sorry. Final wishes? No, you're not getting it.
Yeah, exactly.
You cuckoo bird. Yeah, this guy's out there. He was way out there. And I learned about this place, golly, I think it was 2 years ago when I took Emily to Chicago. We did a tour. I was like, hold on a minute. He went to the University of Michigan? Been thinking about him ever since.
Yeah, well, there you go. You little twisted bird. I know.
Something's wrong with my brain. Well, that's our story for today, everyone. Thank you so much. As always, we appreciate you listening. Please tell everybody you know about the show. Not only should you like, subscribe, comment, and share, tell everyone you know who loves true crime. And please leave a comment on any platform that allows it. So follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. So thanks again, everyone, and we will see you all back on Wednesday, Round Robin.
Bye.